Our next speaker is Carmen Gentile, and for more than 2 decades, he has covered war and unrest around the world. His work has appeared in USA Today, CBS News, Esquire, and many other leading outlets. He is also the author of the book Blindsided by the Taliban, and which is a retelling of his unusual injury while reporting in Afghanistan. More recently, he co-founded One Down Media, which combines storytelling from around the world with motorcycling. So he is a journalist, author, and writer. And thank you so much for joining us, Carmen.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Calling me a pro is a bit of a stretch, but I'll take it for the time being, especially as it pertains to motorcycling. There's so many more adept riders out there than myself, but in terms of what I do with motorcycling is a little bit different, I think, than most media outlets out there. I've spent, what we've tried to do with One Down Media is combine the kind of storytelling that I like to do from all over the world, and motorcycling. It's basically me just trying to have it all. And I guess it'd be a little professionally greedy in that sense. Like Elisa mentioned, I am a longtime reporter who has specialized in covering difficult places around the world. I started my career in the late 90s. I was based in Cairo, in Egypt, and I lived there for a couple of years, and that's where I cut my teeth as a young reporter. And where I first got my hankering for wanting to do stories and overseas and really push myself personally. This was at a time before I even started riding motorcycles. I did a bicycle tour from Cairo. I rode my bicycle once from Cairo to Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula through the desert, and it was quite the ordeal. I had to endure sandstorms and a freak snowstorm because it happened in the wintertime in the mountains. And that's where I started to really get that yearning for wanting to be on the open road. And it wasn't until later that when I was living in Brazil, a few years later, that I learned to ride a motorcycle. I actually learned to ride in the unforgiving streets of Rio de Janeiro, which taught me how to keep my head on a 360 swivel to ride. And it definitely gave me a good lesson in road awareness. But it wasn't until recently that I came up with the idea, having traveled all over the world, reporting from dozens of countries, to combine my love of motorcycling and storytelling. I first was able to do that for Motorcyclist magazine. Myself and a photographer named Nish Nalbandian, who's also a rider. He and I had been covering the war in Iraq. At this point, this wasn't the US-led war. This was the war, the iteration of the war that was involving mostly Iraqi forces against the Islamic State. And he and I were embedded with Iraqi special forces in the northern city of Mosul, which was the de facto capital of the Islamic State in Iraq. They had effectively taken over a city of 2 million people and held them hostage for many years. He and I were there covering that war, which was a terrible, terrible situation, some of the worst urban combat I've seen in my life. But out of that situation, we discovered something that sparked an idea in us, and that was this old Ural motorcycle that we found that had been damaged in the war, belonged to a man who was looking to get rid of it. It was full of bullet holes, the tires were flat, and a piece of a wall that had been struck by a mortar had actually fallen on the gas tank and crushed it. But we got it in our heads that we wanted to buy this bike from him and then ride around northern Iraq and tell the story of what was happening in Iraq through that bike. And the people along the way that helped us fix it, get us off the road, get us out of the city, and let us ride it around northern Iraq. We did the story for motorcyclists, and it proved so popular that we started thinking about how we could replicate this concept again. And since then, we created, myself and Michael Wilson and Blue Thomas created One Down Media. And One Down has the express goal of doing that kind of storytelling, really unusual, maybe riding from unusual places, telling the story of what's happening in the world through motorcycling. You know, I've come to realize, reading a lot of other motorcycle publications, just how woefully inept I am at the bells and whistles of motorcycles. I am not somebody that you would go to for any advice on makes and models. It's embarrassing how little I know, in fact, but I love to ride, and I love storytelling, the kind of storytelling that I do, and I wanted to figure out a way to combine those two, and One Down Media is our attempt to do just that. We've done stories both domestically and overseas, you know, combining those different types of storytellings that you don't see typically in other motorcycle publications. One of the things you'll notice in anything that we write about is that we never really get into the makes or models of the bikes. We might mention that it's a certain bike and it's a certain size, but never anything specific about it. It's just about how the riding lets us connect to the road and to the people we meet along the way, and to their stories. You know, one of the things I learned a lot about in that type of storytelling was in Iraq, because we were riding this unusual bike, and you know, with a sidecar that had these holes in it, and you know, we had the opportunity to speak to people who had been affected so deeply and in Iraq during that time by the war. One of the people we interviewed for that story was the person who helped us repair that bike, and he told us the story about how Islamic State fighters had forced him to fix their bikes, even though he clearly wasn't a supporter of the Islamic State, and under, you know, threat of death to himself and his family, he was forced to fix their bikes as well. And we were able to convey a sense of what was happening in the country to an audience that maybe doesn't pay that close attention to what's going on, or has never read a story like that. You know, so we were able to tell a story that was very important to us personally, because we had spent so much of our time and risked our lives to tell it to a different audience, and that I found really rewarding, and that's what One Down Media does. I like to think that a lot of the stories that we've done there are stories that can be read and enjoyed and considered informative, whether or not a person rides. We've interviewed folks who have ridden in Iran, for example. There's a woman that we spoke to who is Iranian. I take that back. There's two different people we've spoken to, both women who ride in Iran, where it's not typically okay for Iranian women to ride, and you know, flouting the very hardline Islamic laws there. They go out and ride, and we were able to tell the story of what was happening in Iran at that time. The last story we did from Iran was right after the U.S. had that exchange with Iran, where the U.S. killed that General Soleimani, and in return, Iran had fired on U.S. forces in Iraq. So right as that was happening, I happened to be speaking to this woman, and you could see the story on One Down Media about what was happening, and you know, what was the reaction in the country at that time, and what was the reaction to her being a female riding through the country. And you'd be surprised at some of the things that she had told us, how receptive some people were to her riding there, and how friendly people were. So, you know, I feel like what we can do at One Down Media with this approach is try to dispel some popular myths about countries like Saudi Arabia or Iran. We've had, like I said, we've had somebody do a story where we interviewed someone who's done riding in Saudi Arabia. We've interviewed folks who are from Australia, people who have ridden all over Latin America, people who have ridden in Africa, all over. And for me, it's really gratifying because I get to wear two hats, or one hat and one helmet. At the same time, I've got my journalist hat, you know, calling back on all the years of work I've done overseas, combining that with the work with my love of riding. And I feel as though we've opened a new channel toward, you know, a different kind of motorcycle journalism. We clearly haven't reinvented the wheel. I would never I would never assume that I have, but it's something that's different for us. And I think it's a little bit different than what you typically see in other publications. We're still finding our voice and finding our way, but we've met amazing people who have told us their stories of what their rides are like. And along the way, we hope to inform people about a little slice of the world they possibly with which they're not familiar. And that's been, like I said, it's been really rewarding for us. So I hope that other folks find it as appealing. We've been steadily growing our readership, gotten a little bit of commercial interaction. We've had some deals with smaller companies to do giveaways and things like that. And, we had a deal where we worked with Yamaha to do a story here in the US, where I was reporting on the Kurdish community in the Nashville area. The Kurds are people from northern Iraq, Syria, and Iran, who are an ethnic minority who don't have their own homeland. And they have, many of which have resettled in the US, and the largest Kurdish population is in, of all places, Nashville. So I traveled to Nashville, and again, with the same reporter with whom I'd done that Iraq story years earlier, Nish Nalbandian, he's a photojournalist. He and I went and we got these bikes in Atlanta and rode to Nashville, bikes that Yamaha supplied for us. And we rode around Nashville and we met with the Kurdish community there. And basically it was an extension of the reporting we had done in Iraq, because we'd spent so much time with the Kurdish people and the Kurdish military there, which is called the Peshmerga. And so we were able to see what it was like for Kurds who had resettled in America to escape the violence and the tyranny that they had suffered under during the Saddam Hussein years, and to see a different aspect of a culture that we'd come to know on the other side of the world. It was amazing. And we found a young Kurdish motorcyclist on our very last day so that we could round out the story, telling folks what this community is like, all from behind the perspective of the handlebars. So it's been a really rewarding new project for myself and my partners. And moving forward, we hope to do more of that. We've got plans for different projects that have obviously been put on hold because of recent events, but we're still talking to folks out there who've done, who've ridden all over. It's amazing. If you just go to onedownmedia.com and go through our stories. If you sign up for our newsletter, you get full access to all the stories. They're free. And you can just see some of the places that we've covered. Riders, people who have ridden, like I said, all over Latin America, South America, Central America, in the US, pretty much everywhere but Antarctica. We've had coverage of people who ride, and I'm looking forward to do more of that riding myself once circumstances allow it. So if anybody has any questions about what One Down Media is about, or for me personally, now's the time.
Well, while we wait for folks to put their questions in the box, I have several questions for you. Thank you so much for telling us about what you do. I am an adventure rider and I like traveling around the world. And I myself have found that it's the people that I remember from my travels. Can you tell us who's the most interesting character you've met on the road, or characters?
Definitely those folks that I met riding in Iraq, for sure. You can't compare. We were there in the summer of 2017, and right after the Iraqi forces had pretty much sewn up the end of and expelled much of the Islamic State out of the city of Mosul. But it was at the tail end of the fighting there, and the city was in ruins. And even while we were having our bike worked on, you could hear that there was fighting just a few blocks away as the last holdout Islamic State fighters were not going down without a fight. And I marveled at the resilience of these people who, despite having lived basically as hostages in their own home in their own city under the circumstances I can't even get into right here. This is not the place for it, but to see them be able to shake off the shackles of that kind of horror and find joy in just being free for the first time in years. I remember distinctly that the guy who fixed the bike, he took it out for a little test spin. First of all, it was the fastest turnaround I've ever had on a motorcycle being fixed in my entire life. This guy fixed it from headlight to taillight in a matter of 4 hours. I mean, the thing wouldn't even turn over. It had old toys stuffed in the sidecar. Like I said, there were bullet holes in it and the gas tank would crush. This thing, he had it rewired, rebuilt the carburetor, everything brand new, 4 hours just to get us out the door because we didn't want to be in town after dark. But then he took it out, and he knew how to ride Urals really well. It turns out he had a history not only with this bike but with riding other Urals, which the Iraq was using them for postal delivery at one point, and then the Iraqi military was using them as well. But he took it out into this dirt lane along a row of old mechanic shops, and he just started barreling up and down the street, and he did one of those side wheelies on the bike, which had everybody hooting and hollering. People, like I said, who had just been living under the worst conditions imaginable for years, and everybody was so happy and so thrilled. It was such an amazing moment, and I'll never forget that. Yeah. Can you hear me? I can't hear you now.
No, I apologize. I had muted myself. So when he was doing one of those ones where the sidecar comes up,
yeah,
and entertaining everybody.
Yeah,
that's very cool.
Yeah, that was phenomenal. Yeah, I've since ridden. I rode the Ural there. It was the first time I'd ever ridden a sidecar bike, and for all the work they had done to it, it was still a little rickety, and it's daunting if you've ever ridden one, especially one that's been put through the paces like that one had been. And we rode it all around northern Iraq, and it was amazing. But to see somebody handle it with that kind of acumen, it was impressive. I'll never forget that. Yeah.
That's fun. I have a couple of questions in the queue, and I'm going to ask one more of you before I get into those. How do you choose your stories? How do you find those interesting stories that nobody else is covering?
If you go someplace where things are really going wrong, you'll typically find those types of stories. Unfortunately, I have friends all over the world that I've made in these places where sometimes things go awry, and I always when I tell them I'm coming to town, they're happy to know that I'm coming, but at the same time they'll say to me, "Well, we know clearly something's going wrong here because you're coming back." It's not just a matter of going places though where things are going wrong. It's about listening to people, like you mentioned in your adventure riding. It's about listening to people's stories. The people are what make the places you visit really interesting. There's a lot to be said for beautiful mountains, picturesque seas and whatnot, but it's the people. So I'm that kind of reporter. I've never been a deep dive investigative reporter. I don't, flesh out, secret documents. I'm just a one-on-one kind of guy. Me and my notebook, let's have a conversation. And just by talking to people and putting yourself in positions of where you're open and listening to people's stories, no matter where you are, you'll find something interesting. Recently, I did a story. Was actually at the beginning of the winter, where I had another Ural I got from a dealership in the Pittsburgh area. And I went with my partner, Lindsay Plaskett. She and I went and rode around West Virginia. And she was in the sidecar and I was riding the bike. It was very cold. We were riding at the beginning of winter, but we rode to a Hindu temple complex called New Vrindavan, and we spent some time there. And that to me was really eye-opening. I'd spent time in India, but to see folks coming from all over the world to this corner of West Virginia. And, you know, I grew up in the Pittsburgh area, and I own another business here in this area. That's why I'm in Pittsburgh right now. And to know that this place was only an hour away, that I'd never visited, never even heard of until recently, was really great. So you can find adventure, you can find excitement, you can find good stories to tell just about anywhere. You don't have to go to the other side of the world to tell them.
That's awesome. And that's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah.
David Hall wants to know if you can give us any insider information about upcoming stories.
Yeah. You know, I'm working on a project that would take me to a number of countries. I can't get into the real specifics of it right now. But I am working on a project whereby I'd be going and writing and reporting from a number of different countries. A lot of the countries that are those that I've previously visited, from which I previously reported, places in which I specialized, because there's a lot of difficult things happening there. There's conflict. I plan on returning to Iraq at some point and writing there again. Afghanistan as well. It's been a while since I've been back to Afghanistan. I would love to do some writing there. Haiti is another place I'd love to go back to. I've spent a lot of time in Haiti, reporting from there. And you know, my favorite is still Latin America. I lived in Brazil for 4 years, and I would love to go back there. I was just talking to a photographer there about what's happening. Things are really bad there right now with coronavirus, and they also have a lot of political upheaval with their president, Jair Bolsonaro. So that's another place I plan on revisiting and riding, because this photographer with whom I was talking, he also rides. So it's interesting. It's funny. A lot of the people, my friends and colleagues with whom I work covering conflict, also happen to be motorcyclists. I mean, who would have thought that those two would go together? Of course they do. You know? Yeah. Of course people who cover conflict also ride motorcycles. So there's a ton of us. So it's also seemed like a natural fit. It's something that we've all discussed a lot. So there are a number of people with whom I'm planning to partner, who are photographers who also ride to do news stories.
Cool. Thank you. And Jan Plessner says that she communicated with you back in December, and she thinks your stories are amazing. She wants to know, in addition to writing, do you have any other passions that are a close second or third?
Yeah. You know, I learned to ride motorcycles in Brazil, but before that I learned to surf, and surfing became really important to me. When I lived in Rio de Janeiro, I lived 3 blocks from the ocean, and I would surf every morning. I would surf every evening. That to me is an exhilaration that you know, it's akin to motorcycling in a lot of ways, because you know, you get that sensation of flying and a certain autonomy that you can't get in a car, clearly, or you can't get in a group activity. It's singular in its pleasures, but it is similar to motorcycling. So yeah, surfing definitely.
Cool. And another question from David. He wants to know a little bit more about your injury and where it happened, if you're willing to talk about that.
Oh yeah, of course. That's how I sell books. No shame in my game. Yeah, I was embedded with U.S. forces in September 2010 in eastern Afghanistan, right on the Pakistani border, in a province called Kunar. I was embedded with the 101st, and we were on a foot patrol in a remote corner of this province, a very small village, just a dirt road and a handful of stone buildings. And I was shooting video at the time as well. I was working for CBS, and I trained my camera on a group of young men who were sitting on the side of the road. And I you know, having experience doing that type of work, I had a hinky feeling that something was wrong. And these guys were very, very skittish, and so was I. And then while I had my camera on them, talking to them, I heard this loud whooshing sound from behind me, and I looked down the side of the road, and about 40 yards down the road, there was a man holding a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, and he had just fired the ordnance, and I saw that conical green cone of the ordnance coming right at me, and it actually hit me in the side of the head, but it didn't detonate, and it blinded me instantly in my right eye, and breaking all the bones in the side of my face and lacerating my eyeball. It hit me, and then it bounced off my head, and then it hit the platoon leader in the elbow and clattered to the ground. And I caught all this on camera. It's on YouTube. You can find it.
Yeah.
And
wow.
And you know, for a beat, nobody said a word, and you can hear it in the video where someone says to me, "Are you okay?" And no, I'm clearly not okay. Just got shot in the side of the head. And so from that injury, from that moment, I was given expert care by the young men on the ground there, the soldiers who bandaged my wounds, and then I was medevaced out, and I had an operation at Bagram Airfield, the main military base in that part of Afghanistan. And from there was taken to a U.S. military hospital in Germany, and then flown to New York. And I went through a total of 4 surgeries and months and months of rehabilitation. And I eventually then, less than a year later, I was back in Afghanistan. I was back in the same place. And that's the story of my book, is about that injury, my recovery, and then subsequent return to Afghanistan to pick up where I'd left off with covering the war.
You're a very lucky man.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I mean, there's no way I should be here. It's true. I've been doing weekly readings of my book since the virus came out. It's just, something I wanted to offer to people who've read my book. And I do them through my book's Facebook page, which is called My Book Blindsided by the Taliban. So I've been reading it. I recently read the chapter where I got hurt. To this day, I know how fortunate I am, because that same area, one of the military's heavily up-armored vehicles had been hit by a same ordnance, a rocket-propelled grenade, and it just blew the engine block up of that vehicle. So I like to tell people that I've got so many rocks in my head that even I can deflect an RPG, because I'm so thick-headed. But no, it must have been a dud, or there's a million explanations for why it could have happened. It was a faulty ordnance, or the fact that he had fired it so close that the thing didn't have time to arm, and that's why it didn't go off. But yeah, it should have decapitated me. It should have had it gone off, they would have sent me home in a matchbox. So I'm very fortunate, clearly.
Do you feel any pressure about doing something really like big and huge, service oriented with your life, or because of that experience? Yeah,
I go into some detail about that in my book, about how there is that pressure, because every day is supposed to be this miracle where you live it to the fullest. And, sometimes you just want to sit on your ass and watch reruns of Family Guy. And you're like, all this pressure, like, I have to live. Everybody expects me to do this and do that. And you can't live by other people's expectations. Yeah. Sometimes you can't even live up to your own expectations, and you just have to give yourself a break. I've tried, I don't like to define myself by what happened to me. I know clearly it's going to be in the first or second paragraph of my obituary, but I don't want that to be the sole thing for which I'm known. And that's one of the reasons why I went back, is after I was injured, it was because I didn't want that thing to define me for the rest of my life and hamper me in any way. And, I went back and covered the war, and after I'd gotten hurt and returned, I returned 6 or 7 more times. So, and I continue to cover conflict. I was just in Iraq again a year and a half ago. So yeah, I'm just still plugging away.
So we have a question from an anonymous person. Has your other, after the accident, has your other eye learned to compensate for the loss of the other one? Yeah, well, see, I still have my eyes, my vision's really blurry in this eye.
and I have an artificial lens stitched to it that's supposed to refocus it, but my eyes, oh, much you want to hear about this, but it's fixed dilated. It's fixed dilated. So okay. It's like, if for anybody who takes pictures, it's like the aperture in your cameras is open all the time. So everything in this eye is really bright. And it's also very sensitive. It always, when I don't have it covered, it's everything. It looks like I'm staring into the sun, and it also feels like somebody's always blowing on it. So it's always really irritated. And one of the reasons why I keep it covered is because it's more comfortable for me, but it's also more comfortable for people looking at me, because it always looks like I'm really stoned in this eye, but this eye is fine. So, it's just really off-putting sometimes. And for a long time, I wouldn't keep it covered in public because I'm so vain. And so but I got to the point where I'm just like, oh, screw it. I'm so much more comfortable this way, but I don't care. So I have to compensate in a lot of ways, and just in terms of my everyday actions. For my depth perception's not so hot, especially like at arm's length. It's really hard for me to see things, or like getting my key in the door, which is, no big deal. As it pertains to motorcycling,
that was my question.
Yeah, I know. I have two of my different glasses I wear. I will wear these sunglasses, and they're not even prescription. And I wear them, and they're wraparound enough that it keeps everything out. And I always have my shield down. And what's interesting enough is I feel as though my vision defaults to here, even if because I can see out of this side, but it's just really blurry. And so if I have my eye uncovered, I have two fields of vision. That gives me a terrible headache. So, but when I wear my glasses, for whatever reason, because of the tint, it seems to just default to my left eye. And I just have to turn a little bit more and just be more careful and cognizant of what's going on around me. Like, I mean, every rider should be, but I have to take it to that level. And so then at nighttime, I have these, like granny glasses, that your grandmother for nighttime driving, even though people who shouldn't drive, I wear these. And those are really helpful to me as well. But I typically don't ride my motorcycle late at night because of the reasons like I laid out. I feel more comfortable riding during the day.
Yeah. I saw a comment and then it got deleted. It said that you look very debonair with your eye patch. And
I'll take that, Yeah.
And I agree. When I first met you, I was like, what's the polite thing to do here? Do I just like address it in person, I'll just leave it alone.
You have to address, and people are like, what the? Okay. I understand. That's another reason why I never used to wear it, because I didn't want other people to always treat me, like that guy with the eye patch. But then, I have this terrible habit where I'll be talking to somebody, and I'll just keep my right eye closed, and that looks weird too. You're like, why does this guy have like a wink that's stuck? Like, why is he doing this? It was really off-putting. It was somebody finally said to me, like, the way you have to figure this out, because this isn't working. You have to do something better how you're handling this situation. So that like I said, I always kept it covered when I'm working, especially staring at a computer. At that, that distance, I would get terrible headaches unless I kept it covered. So then finally I was like, to hell with it. Let's check your ego and just be okay with it.
I just can't imagine trying to ride a motorcycle. Do you find that it's, do you ride off-road as well? Because I'm wondering, which is easier.
Much off-road. I rode a little bit off-road before, and nobody will ever call me an expert rider. Ever.
Hopefully nobody calls anybody except for Aaron Sills an expert.
Yeah, I'm not one of those guys that you would, it's funny. When I got hurt, against my doctor's wishes, still had another surgery to go, but I went on this trip. I went to Australia and to New Zealand, and I was telling Brittany, I rode some in New Zealand, and I rode off-road there. And prior to going on this off-road trip where there was a guide, they had us do a lap around a dirt track to assess our skill levels. And I had, I was like 3 months after I'd gotten hurt, and I was all gung-ho, and I just wanted to ride because I wanted to feel normal again. And I took the bike out, and immediately into the first turn, I wiped out, and this little 250 bike is just doing donuts around me. The guy walks over and goes, "Yeah, you're in the beginner group." Okay. Yeah, clearly I know. I know that I don't have that skill set. But yeah, off-road was never really my forte. I can do a little bit. I just have to be super careful, and I have to be slower, which is fine. You know, I'm glad to be out there. When I ride on the road, it's same as anybody else. You know, I like it. I hope that it makes me a more careful, thoughtful rider. I know that when I ride with other people, that I have to be extra careful about my distance. But I find that, you know, it's not that much of a problem. Now, driving a car, I can't parallel park anymore. So other than that, it's fine. You know, just have you compensate.
Okay, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
You said you love Latin America. Lynn Biggs wants to know if you've ever done a story in Chile.
No, I haven't. That would be that's definitely on my list. I was based in Brazil for a long time, and I did stories there, Argentina, Bolivia, Venezuela. Unfortunately for Chile, when I was living there, Chile was doing too well, and there was too calm, so there wasn't much for me going on. Like when I first moved to Brazil in 2002, it was a time that after they had the big economic collapse in Argentina, and they had the political unrest and social unrest, and I was there covering that. I covered bouts of unrest in Bolivia, where the president was ousted. There was a coup, and subsequent violent protests there that caused the military to come in. Brazil's always, on shaky ground one way or another, and of course Venezuela. So no, I didn't get to Chile for work. I'd really love to go there though, because it's so beautiful and they have great surfing there as well. Yeah.
Okay. I have another question from Lauren. Did riding aid in your recovery, or did you find riding therapeutic after coming home from high stress areas?
Yes. And this is not to be as whorish as I can as regards to my book, but there's a number of chapters in my book about riding and about how riding helped me. There was a period when before I had gone off on that ill-fated assignment, I left my motorcycle with some friends of mine who live in Arlington, right outside of Washington, D.C. And after I got hurt, my bike just sat there outside, covered up. And it wasn't until I got hurt in September 2010, and it wasn't until January 2011 that I got back to my bike. And I really just wanted to ride. And again, against my doctor's orders, I grabbed my bike, which had been sitting outside all that time. My buddy had started it a few times, and I just wanted to go. And I got on my motorcycle. It was a cold day, winter day, and there was actually snow on the ground. I pulled the cover off of that bike, and the chain was rusty and everything else was a mess. And I just fired. I was like, come on, you got to start, because I just need this so much right now. And it fired up. My BMW Dakar 650, which I still have. It's a 2005. It's, with duct tape on the saddle, but still my baby. I've got that, and I fired that bike up, and I rode it from Washington, D.C. to Miami, because I had previously lived in Miami, in sub-freezing temperatures, just because I wanted to feel normal. I wanted to feel free again, and I wanted to feel as though I weren't afraid, and all the things that were plaguing me at that time. And so yeah, it was really therapeutic, and I wrote about that in my book as well.
Thanks. I've read a lot about you. There's a great Wikipedia page about you, and as I was preparing your intro, and there's a lot of information there. And how can people get your book?
Book's available on Amazon, and if you are more inclined to buy your books from an independent bookseller, which I always encourage people to do as well, there's a website called IndieBound. I think it's indiebound.com or .org. And what's great about that IndieBound is that you can go type in the title, type in your zip code, and you'll find the bookstore nearest to you that carries it. And if they don't carry it, order it from them. Otherwise, go to Amazon, go to Barnes & Noble, wherever you buy your books, you can find it.
Yeah, supporting independent booksellers is a big deal.
Yeah,
especially these days.
I did a lot of readings at independent booksellers when my book first came out, and I love that. Yeah.
You've talked a lot about traveling to places where there's conflict, and yet before this session, you talked to me about traveling in the Balkans.
Right.
So can you tell us two things? Why are you drawn to the areas of conflict, and what do you learn from being there as opposed to in areas where there aren't conflict? Because I know you go both places.
Right. You know, the first time I had ever covered any kind of conflict, there was a coup in Haiti in 2004. And I was living in Brazil at the time, so I wasn't unfamiliar with the hardships that people endure living in poverty and under duress. But I had no idea what I was in for when I got there. And the things that I saw there during those difficult times, there were rival factions. There were those in support of the president then who were armed to the teeth. That included kids riding around on BMX bikes with, you know, holding their AK-47 on the handlebars, and what had once been the army, who were against the president. You know, the urban fighting I saw there and the horror, it was some of the worst things I've ever seen. But out of all that, again, I was struck by just how resilient people could be. And that to me was so, maybe inspiring is not the right word, but it was just so intriguing to see how people could overcome and endure in a way that I didn't think was humanly possible. I certainly didn't think I had that kind of fortitude in myself, but to see other people who had nothing, who have been starving since the day they were born, to always just be malnourished and to be oppressed and to not be cared for, and to see them just continue day after day and manage to, in some capacity, even smile once in a while, amazed me. I think that my experience there taught me that there's more to the human condition than I had seen previously, and I had to just figure out what that other facet was, and whether or not I had it in myself, or whether or not that condition brings out that strength and that resilience in people. And in a lot of ways, it's, you know, there's the old saying that the times make the man, and it's not the other way around. There's truth to that, in the sense that, you know, people don't really know what they're capable of until they're tested. And I think that notion also translates to me. It's a test, you know, how much, you know, perhaps I'm a glutton for punishment. Clearly I'm a glutton for punishment. I mean, there's no debating that fact. You don't get shot in the head in Afghanistan and then go back a whole bunch of times. You know? So yeah, I am a glutton for punishment, but it's more than just that. It's a matter of seeing where your abilities are, where they lie, how much you can take in and disseminate and be able to, you know, be composed in a situation like that. You know, a lot of, I myself included, you know, it's taken a toll on me. Clearly it's taken a toll on me physically, but emotionally as well. You know, it's not easy to see some of the hardships, the death, and some of which is gruesome, more so than I'd ever want to even describe in the stories I've written or in my book. But to be able to make sure that people know that that's happening, that people realize that there are injustices being done, and those injustices cannot go unnoticed by the rest of us. You know, that's how I feel about it. You know, considering what's happening right now in the United States, there's no time more so than now than to exemplify those injustices. So that's an extension of what I've tried to do over the years.
Somebody wanted to know if you plan on telling any of those stories of what's currently happening in the United States through One Down Media.
Well, you know what? I wrote an essay for One Down Media this week, and it's up right now, about how, you know, this week we were sort of taking a knee from motorcycle riding per se, because of what was happening. But to illustrate that not only are there more important things than riding, and clearly what's happening right now is more important than riding, but to make sure that people realize that fact, not in a way that's preaching or whatnot, but that we stand, what One Down Media stands for. Our mission is to bring the world to you in a way that's responsible and informative and entertaining, but also gives you a sense of things that are happening around the world that aren't right. When writing about what was happening in Iran, or writing about what was happening in Iraq and these other places that we've covered, I've always tried to, I don't toe an objective line down the middle. I'm not the Associated Press. We're not a wire service.
You're a storyteller.
We're storyteller. I'm much more of a storyteller than I have ever been a journalist, in my estimation. I've worked for wire services. I've done down the middle, but I'm not down the middle anymore. It's time to take a stand. And so I think we would try to do in this last essay, just to let people know, we're on the side of enlightenment and free thought and free expression and equality for all. We want to make sure that everybody understands that fact. And that's something we strive to do even before what had happened and what's happened in the last couple of weeks in the US. I'm at that point in my career where I feel comfortable saying what's on my mind. And I own another media outlet, which is why I live in the Pittsburgh area part-time, which is called Post Industrial. And we cover, it's a magazine in print, digital, and podcast that's about the Rust Belt and Appalachia, a region we call Post Industrial America. We sneak motorcycle stories into the magazine once in a while. It's important to us to illustrate to people, during these tumultuous times, that what's happening in this region is a reflection of what's happening in the country at large and in the world even, because, protests over the killing of George Floyd have now broken out in New Zealand and Amsterdam, in Germany, in Italy, all over the world. People are recognizing this is not right. This is something that's been going on in America for centuries. In the wake of Rodney King, we thought, okay, this is the end of it. It's, times are going to change. Well, clearly they didn't. We're back here again. But now we have to do something about this. This is intolerable. This is something that needs to be addressed once and for all, come hell or high water. And if you want to be on the right side of history, you're going to be with those who are fighting for change.
We have 1 minute left, and Randy asked a really great closing question for you. What's one piece of wisdom or perspective you might share with those of us who are less well-traveled?
The world is as interesting as you consider it. And like I said, you don't have to go to the other side of the world to find to find new ideas, to find interesting people, to find interesting places. Like I said, I found New Vrindavan, which is less than an hour away from where I am right now, and it was a whole new world to me. You have to have an open mind and an open heart to explore the world, and it doesn't require a war chest of travel funds that'll take you around the globe. You just have to be able to, like I said, open yourself to others, and you will find adventure anywhere.
Awesome closing answer. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Carmen.
This was great.
I love getting your emails from One Down Media. I love reading your stories, and I can't wait to see more. We have a couple of questions that haven't been answered. We will send them to you, and you can answer them directly with our participants.
Great. Love that.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate your time and your storytelling.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks.
See you
Cheers,
guys.
everyone. Cheers, everyone. We are going to take a 10-minute break and see you at the top of the hour for the MotoCap presentation. Bye for now.